Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Monday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The Lakers coaching search is picking up steam. Sort of. We'll get you caught up next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. This one's always free and never behind a paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where over 24,000 subscribers are all wondering when the Lakers are going to hire the next head coach following Darvin Ham. We'll let you know the latest news here in a second. But first, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. So yeah, Andy, the coaching search is the thing right now. We get a little bit into the draft lottery, which is kind of interesting. Had some interesting elements to it on Sunday as the Atlanta Hawks come out of nowhere, mathematical Siberia to win the draft lottery and get the number one pick. That was
3% odds they overcame.
I'd never tell them the odds, Andy. Both of advancing in the playoffs or of they're winning the lottery, because both are near zero.
Well,
so
a team that does everything right, they deserve to catch a break every now and then.
Well, it is widely considered to be the worst number one high-end draft year in a while, so you wonder exactly what they're winning here. It's a bit of a troll to jump this year over others, but they are still in position to get certainly a better player than they otherwise would have, which does potentially at least change up the offseason market. So we'll get to that a little bit, whether today or through the week. But Andy, the coaching search has moved into high gear. Sort of
high-ish gear.
Higher.
Yeah,
basically, go ahead.
I was going to say there are reports coming out now that the Lakers are going to be probably starting the interview process relatively soon, whether from Jake Fisher or from Woj, that they might start putting out feelers during the combine. I believe that's going on right now in Chicago, but Jovan Buha on his podcast that everybody, by the way, should be listening to, friend of the show, he noted that the Lakers plan to have the coach hired by the time the draft actually happens on June 26th, to which I responded, and this is no disrespect to Jovan, because Lord knows he is more day-to-day plugged in than I am or Brian is, but my immediate response was, I should effing hope so. Like, I would like to think that they're going to have their coach hired sometime in the next month and a half. But it does, what I think is interesting, though, about the idea that, yes, they are going to start putting out feelers reportedly, and yes, they may start looking to set up some conversations. They have been going slower than, say, the Milwaukee Bucks, who immediately scooped up Mike Budenholzer, basically the second. Excuse me, the Phoenix Suns, the Bucks fired Mike Budenholzer.
They unscooped Budenholzer.
Right. They booted him, but the Suns scooped him up basically 30 seconds after Frank Vogel's key card stopped working. The Hornets have brought in Charles Lee, top assistant with the Celtics, very quickly. So at this point, though, it's basically the Lakers and the Wizards with any current openings. And unless the Clippers do the very unexpected and let Ty Lue go, it wouldn't shock me at all if those are the only two openings this offseason. You know, the Nets filled theirs with Jody Fernandez. Like, I don't know if anybody else will.
At this point, anybody who's going to get fired would have been fired by now.
So, So when you take into account that the Lakers are only competing against one other team at this point, and one would think at least the Wizards and Lakers aren't looking for exactly the same thing in their coaches, like in terms of if nothing else, the aspiration of the coach themselves. Anybody who's hoping for a deep playoff run is not likely that excited at the prospect of coaching the Wizards.
I will stop. I actually think the list, and if you go about like Jake Fisher noted, the list is the list, you know, and Jovan's list is, I mean, everybody's kind of putting out the same list. It's JJ Redick, it's Kenny Atkinson, Micah Nori, David Adelman. I've seen people put up Chris Quinn, Sean Sweeney as other assistants and stuff as people who might be out there.
Many of whom are still coaching, by the way.
Not as much about somebody like Terry Stotts or something. I think Budenholzer was the other big name among the sort of former coaches that would have gotten a lot of attention. And Woj seemed to imply over the weekend too, the Lakers might have had a little bit more interest in Budenholzer than previously maybe thought or whatever. And that his being taken off the market as quickly as it seems to have happened does put a little bit of a wrench or a wrinkle into what the Lakers were doing. But I will say, I suspect that Washington's list will be pretty similar because there aren't that many, high, you kind of get a feel year after year for who are the high profile assistants. They could leave it. Who's it? Brian Keefe, who's coached them the rest of the year.
Yeah.
I don't know if they thought he did a good job or a bad job. I don't even know if it matters with that team necessarily. And like you say, to some degree, they might be, they might have a very different list of qualifications, but if they do go externally from the organization, I think there'll be a lot of overlap with that. So, I mean, the one thing that I think you can look for as a tell with the Lakers in terms of speeding up their process, in terms of really trying to figure out who they favor, I don't think a person like JJ Redick, although he did interview for Charlotte, I'm not sure if is there a huge difference between interviewing for Charlotte and interviewing for Washington in terms of your aspirations? I mean, Charlotte's got probably some better young players than Washington does, and
I think if Charlotte stays healthier, they have at least more of a direction,
right? I was about to say they are probably and this is saying something. The Locked On Hornets crowd might disagree. They're probably, they're a better run organization. I think
the Wizards have a long-term contract in Jordan Poole that has quickly looked like a terrible decision.
Right.
Like what they're going to be doing moving forward, I think is much murkier than, again, the Hornets are not a particularly well-run organization themselves, but a lot of their issues are, can LaMelo Ball stay healthy?
Right.
If LaMelo stays healthy, they're a drastically different team by that alone.
It's a better gig, certainly, than the Wizards. I don't think there's any question of that. That said, do I think like somebody like JJ Redick would want his first coaching job to be that? And I say that in the most literal sense. First coaching job would be, professionally would be that. No, I do not think that's where he would go. And it's possible he was using the Hornets thing as much as as a practice run, like, to go through the interview process, to, break down a team, to do all that stuff. He is a very, part of what makes people excited about JJ Redick, I'm actually get into this in the next segment, is the preparation and the fanatical attention to detail and all that stuff. So somebody like that knows, you want a couple practice runs before you interview for the job that you really want. Kenny Atkinson would take that interview with Washington. David Adelman would take that interview with Washington. Micah Nori, I think, would take that interview with Washington and stuff. So, like, I think while somebody like Redick might not, I do think somebody like some of the assistants would. And so if you start to see noise that one of those guys is moving things along and becoming a preferred candidate of the Wizards, that would be the one thing that I think would be a tell. And I'm not saying they will, that could be a tell as to who the Lakers are really interested in. Because if let's say David Adelman decides, does 2 interviews with Washington and is starting to become somebody, and if that's somebody the Lakers have interviewed and they wanted, then they will move faster. I'm not saying it's going to happen that way, but I just think that would be the only real tell, to your point, that there isn't a lot of competition there because there's only one other open job, and it's the Wizards. So
yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I can see just as easily a world where Micah Nori or David Adelman say the situation I'm in is pretty good. I'd rather wait
for a better job.
Right.
No question. But if they start to go through the process, then that would be the thing that will either be a tell of who the Lakers are and are not interested in, or could be the thing that gets them to speed up, because otherwise there's no pressure. But I want to break down this Redick thing, because I do think the momentum around JJ as head coach, saw it from Woj, we've seen it from Jovan, is gaining some steam. And I find it fascinating. So let's talk about it next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million users. The easiest, most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you versus the numbers. You pick more than or less than on 2 or more player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the playoff action right now. Win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during the NBA postseason. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks, which with as little as 4 picks. Turn $10 into $1,000 with your basketball or hockey entries on America's #1 fantasy sports app. They offer Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account during these NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs. Again, simple to play. Make your picks, submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use that code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
So, obviously it's interesting to me that I believe this was Jovan sort of talk about, like, currently in his reading, the leading candidates are Kenny Atkinson and JJ Redick. Kenny Atkinson coming from the coach with previous experience, had a couple, more impressive than the record would suggest based on his personnel. Seasons with Brooklyn, has obviously been a top assistant with Golden State for a few years.
He was part of the most recent Warriors staff that won a championship.
Correct. And so, there's some cachet there. The man has plenty of experience. There's no question about it. That said, he's not a super exciting candidate. His head coaching record, say what you will about a guy like Budenholzer, Kenny Atkinson's head coaching record is way short of Mike Budenholzer's or even Terry Stotts's. There's context there, but it's not like you look at that guy and go, man, there's Ty Lue sitting there with a ton of experience and success and all that. Like, nobody's going to be overwhelmed by Kenny Atkinson. And to some degree, I think you put that out there. If you really are narrowed it down between those two guys, you put Kenny Atkinson out there specifically to make it easier to hire JJ Redick. I think that's what that would translate into. If those are your two leading candidates, you're going to end up with JJ Redick.
You really think so?
I do. Because I think, this is not me based on like insider knowledge and stuff. I'm just reading the way that I think the Lakers will go with this, because
I look, I've seen, it's interesting. We had seen before that they were putting more of a premium on experience, which is why we had even devoted a show towards the idea of reuniting with Frank Vogel, which, put aside the fact that most of the Laker fan base that we polled seemed somewhere between lukewarm and, get the F out of here with Frank Vogel. And that was not a amicable exit between franchise and coach. If you are looking for any type of experience, he's one of the few guys that would be out there. And then all of a sudden,
I saw it as a thought experiment as much as anything, because I don't think the Lakers would bring him back, and I don't think Frank would do it. So
sure, no, absolutely,
he's an interesting conversation, because, like you say, if that's what you're looking for, then you should interview him because he's
what's interesting though
two or three
is
guys out there.
If it's what they're looking for, and if you wanted to take your line of thought even further, it may not even be what they're looking for as much as they want to let fans know, hey, we would love to have that. But then when you start seeing that there really aren't any candidates with experience that would get them excited anyway, it could at least give them some cover for following up a first-time head coach who, in their eyes, and the eyes of, I'd say, the overwhelming majority of Laker fans, did not work out with, hey, let's bring in a guy with even less experience than not just Darvin Ham, but any of the other first-timers that we could be bringing in.
I feel like, right. And I feel like if as they go through this process, and they do end up talking to Micah Nori, they do end up talking to David Adelman. Those are the two leading candidates out of this group. I think by most handicappers, and Charles Lee would have been in there too, but he has been hired already. They might pop in one or two other guys that are
Quinn and Sweeney have come up a lot,
right? So like guys like that. But if those two don't get a hard look, and the timing of this is interesting because Nori and Adelman obviously both coaching is. By the way, David Adelman now much higher on everybody's list, and Micah Nori sinking now. The Nuggets have come back and tied the series,
but Sweeney's rising though.
That's right. Everybody
part of Dallas's staff for people,
right? These things swing game to game. If these guys end up getting a little bit like really hard looks, then I think it changes the dynamic. But if it really does end up where the Lakers are kind of looking at these two guys, or where the reporting bears out that most of the focus and most of the attention has been with Redick versus Adelman, I think that is done specifically because Kenny Atkinson is not going to excite anybody. And internally, I don't think, the LeBron and AD are going to get excited about Kenny Atkinson. I feel like that's where they're going to to put themselves in the best possible position to justify hiring JJ Redick. And I say that it sounds like I'm editorializing that I think it's a terrible idea. And I think it's a very risky idea. I don't know if it's a bad idea. I will say Redick, out of all the candidates they're probably going to interview, he's probably going to be the best one. Like, at the very least, it's up there. Like, JJ Redick will win the interview. He's going to be a phenomenal interview. He's going to sound great. He's going to be prepared. He's going to draw up plays. He's going to, it will look really good.
I mean, you don't expect these other guys. You don't expect Micah Nori to be able to draw up plays, and David Adelman to be able to draw up plays.
The polish of JJ Redick in an interview setting is going to be challenging to top. I'm not saying other guys won't. I don't know.
I mean, I've seen Micah Nori interviewed. He's pretty damn entertaining and charismatic.
He is very charismatic and very entertaining and all that stuff. JJ Redick is going to be difficult to out interview. That does not mean that he's going to be the substance of the interview or like the messaging or the ultimate here is my philosophy. Is going to be better than Nori or better than Adelman, or would have been better than Charles Lee, or would have been better than, it will be better than Kenny Atkinson, although Kenny Atkinson is not the most dynamic personality. If you want to hire Redick, if your inclination is we like this guy, we think we're intrigued by him or whatever, I would be 100% surprised, absolutely floored, if the reporting comes out of that anything other than the Lakers were super impressed with, JJ Redick in the interview. I think the interview process for Redick is going to be something that he excels at. And again, if you're trying to create sort of a binary choice between the veteran coach and the risky hire,
I mean, are you just to cut to the chase, are you presenting this like you feel like they've already made up their mind on Redick?
If they really are looking primarily at those two guys,
I think they're looking at more than
I think if they eventually will. But if they really give the most serious attention to those two guys first and foremost, if those are the quote unquote leading candidates, at least on whatever it is, May 13th, I think if that's the case, then yes, I do think they are, if not have made their decision, they're going to have to come up with a reason not to hire Redick. If they really do open it up to those other assistants, to bringing in 2 or 3 other guys, and like you said, using the 6.5 weeks that they apparently have before they hire someone, then yeah, I think that's different. But the bit of reporting that I thought was really interesting was just the one where the focus currently is on those 2 guys.
But when we come back, though, just your premise that those 2 guys would be the front runner right now, and that they're already kind of manufacturing a permission structure to get away with hiring JJ Redick without even any opinion about whether Redick himself is a good or bad idea, I'm just going to explain why that way they're doing this is an awful idea. So we'll talk about that coming up next. Locked On Lakers is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. You put down a Lincoln, you win it, boom, $150 in bonus bet.
People say drop a Lincoln on something.
Yeah. Yeah,
really?
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do. Lincoln gets the slang.
Yeah. Well, they do on this podcast. And as I said it,
you sound like a baller if you're dropping Lincolns all over the place. I don't necessarily think that's true.
In my head, all I was thinking was, is Lincoln still on the $5 bill? I never use cash for anything.
That's like a quarter. That's like 1 1/4 pounder with cheese. We're talking about here.
Well, I mean, that's a pretty good investment for $150 in bonus bets.
That's true.
And you can use those on spreads, on money lines, player props, and all sorts of other options. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Okay, look, again, with me prefacing this by saying I don't really have a strong opinion yet about whether JJ Redick is a good or bad hire. Like I would need to learn more. I mean, really through leaked reports and whatever about what went on in this interview, what he pictured as his vision for the Lakers, for using LeBron, using AD, whatever. Like, there's just a lot more that needs to be learned about Redick, period. Even if you are really jazzed at the idea of, okay, let's give this guy who was a successful NBA role player. He obviously has worked with star players. He has this relationship with LeBron. He's clearly a smart, articulate basketball geek in the best way possible, thinks about this stuff all the time. All that stated. If you've already decided this early on, before interviewing anybody, let's start strategizing a backdoor way to bring in a guy with literally no coaching experience in mid-May, again, before speaking to other candidate, you are doing this wrong. Like, you are doing this straight up wrong in terms of just, we say this word all the damn time when it comes to the Lakers.
P word?
Process.
Yes.
The F kind of process would that be? And I want to make it clear. This is Brian reading tea leaves. This is
right. And it's both reading tea leaves. It is, there's a lot of if here. There's if, because like you said, there are multiple reports about who, but I've heard Woj talking about like, the growing intrigue with JJ Redick, which is reporters speak for the Lakers are really interested in that, or at the very least want to, make it sound like they are. The Wizards have growing intrigue with JJ Redick, does not have the same ring to it. There's different things that Jovan have said, other people have talking about, like there are still a lot of ifs here, and putting stuff together that, but I agree with you. It's not a good process. And I don't even know if it's fully, like, three-dimensional chess, like let's move the board around just to like create. I just feel like it is, some of it could be kind of unconscious, like you're trying to, you know what, you want to put out a, you can't just hire JJ Redick. You got to interview somebody. You want to feel like you have.
They should interview a lot.
They should interview a ton of people.
Period.
It doesn't even have to be super duper conscious at this point of like, we've made our decision and whatever. I'm just saying is I feel like this is sort of, if you're inclined to see things a certain way, if you are intrigued by JJ Redick, if that intrigue has turned into really talking yourself into why this is a good idea, why he's the best candidate or whatever, and you think this is where you're going to go, you consciously or unconsciously having him competing against Kenny Atkinson is the way to give yourself the permission structure.
I think you're taking this a little too literally. In all honesty, I think you're taking this.
I'm saying ultimately,
very literally.
I think they're going to widen the net, and they're going to interview Nori, and they're going to interview Adelman, and they're probably interview a couple other people. And again, they have plenty of time to do this stuff. But just the interviewing, guys go into this process. I rarely think people show up through this process where it's a little like sort of like the top 25 in college football rankings, like the preseason rankings in the top 25. Like if you start off near the top of the list, it's a lot easier for you to stay there than if you're ranked 28, 23rd or 24th in the country and you go undefeated, but you've still got to leapfrog all those other teams. If JJ Redick starts in a favored position, it is going to be much easier for him to stay there than if he starts off grouped with, or even thought as an interesting idea, but for some other team with the assistants and things like that. And, it's easy to overstate the case for Redick because he's got the podcast with LeBron, because he's on TV, because he's obviously a really smart guy. And he could be really good at this. Like, I'm not trying to discount the idea that Redick could show up and be really good. It would be the exception to the rule, of guys with zero coaching experience who go right into it and succeed. Like Jason Kidd lasted a year in Brooklyn before he jumped ship to Milwaukee. Like, it didn't go so well for Steve Nash. I don't even really put Steve Kerr in that boat because he was an executive for a long time. If the Lakers were saying they were going to bring Redick into the front office to work with Rob, I would be ecstatic. Like, that to me is perfect. Do that. But that's not what we're talking about here.
I'd be tempted to say you want to replace Pelinka with him. I'd roll the dice.
Fine. I'm totally okay with that. I mean, they hired Rob with no executive experience.
If for no other reason, then it's a totally different perspective than they have not had in the building at all. Correct. I would be willing to give that opportunity to Redick sight unseen. Absolutely. Because I think that would actually be an easier transition for Redick than the coaching thing, acknowledging he might crush it with coaching. But again, taking your premise, I understand the idea of being intrigued by him for all the reasons that we've talked about before. I don't think it is anything unusual or worrisome to be intrigued by Redick. But the idea that Redick would strongly jump the line with his total lack of experience, the only way that logically happens is if you have LeBron in your ear constantly saying, this is the guy to hire. Or you are just, and very Lakery thing, you are so tantalized by the big shiny thing and the next shiny thing that you decide the shiny thing is the thing we must have.
This is kind of what I'm getting at. Like, if LeBron is whispering in their ear, he may be whispering in their ear about the thing that they're kind of interested in anyway. You know what I'm saying?
I.e., as we've tried to explain to people, i.e., as we've tried to explain to people, the Russell Westbrook situation. Correct. Yes, LeBron and AD very clearly wanted Russell Westbrook. This is well reported. They had a dinner together before the trade. Like, this stuff doesn't happen if LeBron and AD aren't interested, if LeBron and AD aren't in Pelinka's ear saying, do this. But you and I have never bought into the idea that Rob Pelinka hated the idea of Russell Westbrook. No, we've never bought into that, or that he was strong-armed, any of that.
At all. The star bleeper hire for a star bleeping organization is not Mike Budenholzer. It is certainly not Terry Stotts. It is not Micah Nori. It is not David Adelman. It is not any other assistant you can think of. It is JJ Redick. That is the star hire that a star consumed organization would go with. And again, he could be the, I would say the next Sean McVay, except Sean McVay was an assistant for a long time before getting a head coaching job. We can spend more time on.
There are not a lot of comps.
There aren't. Well, and most of them don't succeed right away.
I'm just saying there aren't many, right, period.
Because most people think this is a bad idea, and most people don't try it. That's the other thing too. Is most players, it's almost always going to be a player, obviously former player, don't try this. They, everybody says I got to be an assistant first. Nobody thinks they can go straight from no experience to a head coaching job, particularly
for the Lakers.
For the Lakers, right? And I'm not against it as much as anything, because I want to see what happens to some degree. And there's no, like, Kenny Atkinson wouldn't automatically be a better fit for the Lakers. Micah Nori wouldn't automatically be. David Adelman wouldn't automatically be. I would say those two guys, though, show up at the table with a lot of that, potential Sean McVay feel, to young guys with good assistant experience, and a lot further along. Charles Lee would have been the same way, a lot further along in the development curve than Redick. You don't know what you don't know about being in that spot until you're there. But the guys who've been on the bench and have been in all the meetings and know more than Redick does. Anyway, I didn't mean to take up the entire show on just this premise, but the idea of sort of unconsciously even creating a permission structure for themselves to go with the shiny object. This is how it would happen. Okay. So I think it's interesting.
Real quick before we go, I wanted to address, because we've gotten a lot of comments over the last, 48, 72 hours since we did a show talking about Mark Jackson as a possibility. And, because his name has come up a lot from our viewers and our listeners. And I'd seen a lot of comments that thought Brian and I were specific, because Brian and I both would not hire Mark Jackson. The reasons we mentioned were just he's been out of the game for a very long time, and he has a reputation as being very difficult to get along with. But there were some people who thought that we were disrespecting, like openly disrespecting Mark Jackson by laughing during two sections when we were talking about him. One being we were talking about this being Mark Jackson season, and I had a slip up where I said firing Mark Jackson rather than hiring. I just want to clarify something. In both cases, we were not laughing at Mark Jackson or the concept of Mark Jackson. The jokes we were laughing at were the Lakers constantly having to hire, then fire, then rehire, fire, rehire, fire their coaches. Hence, this is Mark Jackson season, because every time there's an opening, Mark Jackson is linked to the Lakers.
Right, again, because he's also a big, shiny, high-profile name.
Right, and my Freudian slip. Like, we do not care if people disagree with our reasons for not wanting to hire Mark Jackson, and if people think we're not being transparent in our reasons. It's not an argument. We're going to win anyway, so it's not worth having. I just wanted to clarify that we were not mocking Mark Jackson himself. That's not an impression that I think, or Brian would want to give. So I just wanted to clarify that. Again, disagree with us all you want. That's your right. Go for it. We enjoy it. But wanted to make sure that was clear.
Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out and discuss coaching candidates like Mark Jackson and JJ Redick and Kenny Atkinson. We'll be back to talk about potential other candidates, as well as the search takes shape and how this Hawks thing landing the #1 pick might impact what the Lakers do this offseason. So we'll see everyone tomorrow.